I'm not asking for forgiveness for what I've done.
I'm done making excuses for you and for me. Nobody's untouchable.
Now, in today's breakdown, we are going to be talking about a new character that has been announced for Power Origins Season 1. Another new detective to add to the roster that they've been building for law enforcement. Dominic Raines will be playing Detective Fred Drexel, which does probably give us the hint that law enforcement are going to have a heavy role in this series, as every Power show does. But with these sets of law enforcement officers that we've been introduced to so far for Power Origins, based on their character descriptions, based on the fact that they've also got 18 episodes for Season 1 to begin to tell a really compelling story, it does seem as if they're not just going to be background characters, they will be playing a major part of the story. As always, when you've got law enforcement and the game that Tommy, Ghost and Kanan are in, their role is going to collide at some point as well. There's going to be dirty cops, some holding secrets of their own, shady moves behind their partners' backs, I'm sure they'll also clash as well, and much more. The betrayal, manipulation, lies, and thirst for power, it doesn't just apply to those guys in the streets, it also applies to those guys at boardroom level, in politics, and also those guys in a uniform with a badge, law enforcement. Maybe we see some level of corruption and some real-world stories and issues as well. So there's definitely a few aspects to look forward to with this roster that they've been building in terms of law enforcement. And that's the agenda for today's breakdown. We're going to be taking a look at Detective Drexel's character, what we know about law enforcement so far, as well as how it affects the major players like Ghost, Tommy and Kanan going into Power Origins Season 1. Now the character description for Raines reads the following. Detective Fred Drexel, who after a controversial incident within the NYPD, is tasked with navigating an intense investigation. As is common with cases like this, things can and will get messy. The Deadline article also reads it's a safe bet that Detective Drexel will also be working closely with the other members of law enforcement. So just before we run through Detective Drexel in a bit more detail and dig into his character description, just as a very quick brief reminder, these are the previous law enforcement officers that we've been introduced to as well. We've got Detective Glover Archibald, who has seen and heard it all, a man who doesn't like to be challenged and also believes in solving cases the old-fashioned way. Detective Burns, he's speculative, curious, and a relentlessly persistent cop who needs to dig and insert himself in investigations that aren't his own. We also have Melanie Rivers, an officer who's said to be strategic and a take charge kind of a woman who can be quite secretive and isn't who she seems to be. Again, this character description along with the other two just homes in on what I mentioned right at the beginning of this video, how law enforcement will be holding secrets, making shady moves behind each other's backs, potentially working with those guys in the streets, maybe even being paid off by Kanan, working against their own team and their task force. It's one of the elements that really did make the early seasons of Power great TV. We had the Eastern District Task Force that was on the hunt for Felipe Lobos' distributors in New York, who only happened to be two characters who Angela went to high school with one of them being her ex, who she was now seeing again. But you had the element of Cooper Sachs, he was in a tug of war and a battle for power within the office with Angela. There was all these side plots and subplots within law enforcement as well. There was Agent Medina, Greg Knox, who complicated the issues inside and outside of the office for Angela because of how they were love interests. That was until Ghost came back into Angela's life. Mike Sandoval, who then turned out to be working for Felipe Lobos, who also killed Greg Knox. That was after he was suspended when he started doing his own investigation and uncovered Mike Sandoval was the inside man. So I'm definitely expecting a lot of fuckery within the precinct, their offices, and their task force and team. With Power Origins also being set in the early 2000s, we may also get a very similar feel and the vibe of The Wire as well. With 18 episodes for Season 1, we often speak about how they can really flesh the story out for Ghost, Tommy, and Kanan. But an angle that we haven't really considered or spoke about is them actually doing the same with law enforcement. First of all, we need to be introduced to these new players of law enforcement. We need to get to know them, what their roles are, where they sit in terms of their hierarchy and their role in terms of Power Origins, build a relationship, build a connection with them in terms of what they're about, what their agenda is, and what their role is on the show, their backstory, history, family, what secrets they're hiding, especially when it comes to Melanie Rivers. What was the incident that occurred within the NYPD with Detective Drexel? Who are their love interests, and will it get murky with any of the characters that they love, whether it be love interests or their family? Could any of the detectives figure out some deep corruption within the office and the system, which provides them with a real challenge? With 18 episodes for the first season and my reference to how they did it with OG Power and how The Wire really hit home with the law enforcement aspect as well, I'm definitely expecting something similar here with Power Origins, and personally I'm looking really forward to it. It does feel as if it will have a different feel to it because of the era that it's set in, the characters that we have on the show, and also just knowing Sacha Penn, he'll definitely write a great story, not just for those guys in the streets, but also for those guys within law enforcement. There's also going to be a lot of stories to be told with these particular characters and their backstories, just like we learned about Angela's history, her family, being introduced to characters like Paz Valdez, Junior Valdez, and also her father who was suffering from dementia. So with these characters, we should definitely expect them to really flesh out law enforcement because they no doubt will be involved heavily in the show. Now, in terms of Detective Fred Drexel himself, apparently he had a controversial incident within the NYPD. What that controversial incident is, I mean, take your pick. It really could be anything. I'm sure at some point it definitely will be revealed in season 1 in terms of what that incident was, the impact that it had and who was involved. But I do think we need to keep that information in the back of our minds. It does seem like it may potentially be a big part of a larger story within Origins, especially within law enforcement, and maybe even kind of trickles over to the streets. I personally wouldn't be surprised if the incident is kind of tied into some real life events either, such as police corruption. Back in Raising Kanan Season 3, we made reference to a former NYPD detective, which was, I believe, Louis Scarcella, just off the top of my head, who was accused of framing dozens of people for murder, which led to the convictions being overturned. We know how Raising Kanan is the most realistic of the Power shows, which brings in a lot of real-life elements across the board from law enforcement, music, to the streets, and I do think we'll see the same theme continue over into Power Origins. Whether this highly controversial incident is linked to a real-life story or not, there definitely will be some stories involved in some shape or form, no doubt. But with Fred Drexler, he's going to be sent on an intense investigation, which I'm sure is going to involve some of our main players that we're going to be following in the streets. That's Ghost, Tommy, and Kanan. That's how I think they'll collide with Detective Drexel, and how the case could start to turn real murky. It may be a murder related to them in the streets, someone that they've killed that puts Detective Drexel onto them, and potentially the formation of a task force or a team to hunt down the perpetrators. But just like the character description teases, as with cases like this, things can and will definitely get messy. Again, the reason why we went through the brief history and lessons with Power in terms of Mike Sandoval is because things will get messy, just like we saw in Power with Greg Knox, or just like we recently saw on for Season 3 when it came to Stacey Marks and Tommy's relationship. So when it does get murky, when there's betrayal involved, manipulation, lies, and death, no doubt they're going to make life really difficult for those guys to operate in the streets. And I really am interested to see how it impacts Ghost, Tommy, and Kanan's operation, how they deal with law enforcement, because Ghost won't be calling all the shots like he was back in Power. He is older and we will see him dealing with his crew and soldiers of his own, but the real boss will actually be Kanan, perhaps also Breeze, although there definitely still is a question mark on that one at the moment. But if Ghost isn't calling all the shots, it really is going to be interesting to see how Kanan deals with law enforcement, because we also saw how Ghost did it back in Power, but also heard it from Kanan's perspective as well.
Back in the days, me, Tommy, your pops used to run this block. So the cops started to know our faces. Charlie Sinners, they used to hop out, run down on us. Ghost be gone for a week, even think to run this shit.
We also have to remember Ghost had a squeaky clean record. When Angela did a background check on both Tommy and Ghost, Tommy's search brought up a long rap sheet. I'm definitely expecting Tommy to get into fights in the streets, getting his hands dirty. We know he's never been afraid to do so and show his face in the streets, and with that, I wouldn't be surprised if he's tossed in a holding cell a few times, but definitely not Ghost. He had a squeaky clean record. So when it actually comes to trouble with law enforcement, I am actually expecting to see those traits of Ghost being a smooth operator that we saw on Power, very quick on his feet, quick with his mind, where he's able to outsmart them, outthink them, and stay one step ahead of them at all times. In Power, he had a very sophisticated method of conducting his operation. He was well away from the streets as a Ghost. Not many people were able to put a face to the name. He put a lot of distance between himself and what those guys do in the streets. But it doesn't mean that the people that he has underneath him are as clever, smart, and quick on his feet as Ghost. I do think with the heavy influence of law enforcement, there will be times where some of them do find themselves in troubles with the detectives. I think it's kind of logical to think that, and I also think at some point we may even see a situation like we saw with Scrappy. In Season 2, Lies caught up with him due to his gambling addiction, and they thought he was a snitch after Detective Howard saw him at the precinct. He got the wrong end of the stick, and with Rock trusting Detective Howard's word, she killed him at the end of episode 2. So no doubt Tommy and Ghost will have to deal with snitches and people talking to law enforcement, and it really is going to be interesting to see how both handle and navigate those particular situations. We know from Power, Ghost was always hesitant to kill those guys in the crew that showed loyalty. For example, Liliana, he definitely didn't want to kill Roller either, but Tommy gave him no choice. Same with law enforcement, he was always against killing detectives, but with Tommy, he's very much in the mold of Kanan. He couldn't care less who it was, law enforcement, a lawyer in Joe Proctor, a snitch in the streets, a liability like Maria Suarez. Tommy really was ruthless. So it really is going to be interesting to see them potentially clash on this part as well, because they never really agreed on how to handle law enforcement back in Power. Ghost always used to say he had things under control, but at times, he definitely didn't. I am also hoping with the way they seem to be adding a real law enforcement element, we see some competent detectives that are able to make things happen, make cases stick, make some of these people pay for their crimes, whether it be those in the streets, dirty businessmen or dirty politicians, or even corrupt law enforcement. I definitely want to see people in handcuffs. I mean, it really would be cool to actually kind of look at one of these shows in Raising Kanan or Power Origins, where one of these characters have been thrown into jail for 15 or 20 years, which then could potentially mean they may be alive in the current timeline. Let's see what they do with law enforcement, because by the sounds of it, who they've announced, they definitely will be a big presence for sure. But that's a wrap with where we are with law enforcement. Detective Fred Drexel will be tasked with navigating an intense investigation, but a character who has also had a highly controversial incident within the NYPD as well. The case is going to get messy, it's going to get murky, I'm sure it's going to lead to a lot of secrets being spilled and clashes within law enforcement. A character to look out for there is Melanie Rivers. Let's see how it also impacts Ghost, Tommy and Kanan in their streets, their operation, how they run their operation, and generally how they deal with law enforcement at that young age in the early 2000s compared to how they dealt with law enforcement back in Power. Ghost was a very smooth operator in Power. I do think we'll see something very similar, but it definitely is going to be interesting to see how they navigate some of these tricky situations. With that being said, drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.